UN launches digital biometric system worldwide. It's called Journey Pass. And today I do have a special guest, no stranger to our platform, Marie Diaz from Eyes on the Times. Welcome, Marie.
Good afternoon, Pastor. It's great to be back.
What do you focus on?
Well, we're going to be looking at the slow incremental steps that are being taken, especially by the United Nations, to establish this global digital infrastructure, which we know is going to lead to the mark of the beast crisis. So we're going to delve into that today. Let's get right into it, my sister. Sure. So first, we're going to begin by taking a look at a clip so that your audience will be able to see what they're rolling out. So let's take a listen to that. Here it is.
We've been wondering how we're all going to get pulled into this digital cage of the future. How are they going to get us to subscribe when a lot of us believe in these peaceful acts of non-compliance? And there are various things we can do in life to dodge this system and this ever-encroaching sense that we're going to be living in this digital matrix. Well, we got a clue this weekend, and it's going to be about international travel, of course, whether you are going to want to have and own a journey pass. Now that means no passport, just your facial recognition when you walk into the airport, and the airport will know which flight you're getting on, and you will just walk through. Of course, what could possibly go wrong with a system like that?
Oh, Marie.
That's a good question, right? And so again, as she stated, one of the things that we all have been interested in is wondering how they were going to get us to be able to transition to this digital system. And here it is. You know, they're going to be introducing it at the airports. The airports are going to be the instrument that they're going to use to be able to facilitate this transition. And in case it was unclear, what they're planning to do is to get rid of boarding passes, and you're going to use facial recognition as your boarding pass. And so, you know, we're talking about millions of people every day who use the airport. And if you choose not to transition, or I guess you really don't have a choice, you have to accept these new terms and regulations in order for you to be able to enjoy the luxury of being able to fly.
You know, this has always been the end goal, to roll out a digital-only society. And we're seeing it being implemented in every facet and aspect of life. Now, if everything is now placed on a digital-only platform, what's going to happen when the black swan takes place? This massive, earth-shattering cyber attack. What's going to happen? And Klaus Schwab says it's going to make the pestilence 19 pandemic seem and appear as a small disturbance. That simply means, as the pandemic lasted for approximately 3.5 years, then whatever the cyber attack is going to be when it comes, it's not going to be a one-day event, Marie, a one-week negative impact on the global sphere. It's going to be for months on end. And everything is going digital. It doesn't make sense, which shows while some folks may say, well, who wants to walk around with paper anymore? Who wants to walk around with paper anymore? Give us this so-called journey pass so we can make our way through the airports. What they don't understand is there is an ulterior motive, a dystopian agenda that is afoot. Marie, continue.
Yes, I concur. And I believe that it's a means to an end, you know, destroying the old system and transitioning us. And as you rightly stated, a lot of these global shocks and events is to be able to get everyone on the same page. We're going to see this as we continue on here in this presentation. So let's take a look at this next headline that's coming from the Times. It says, new airport rules will get rid of boarding passes and check-ins. The next article, which is coming from GBN News, states the following. It says, boarding passes and check-in to be scrapped in historic change to airport rules. This represents a fundamental shift from the fragmented systems currently in place. If successful, The changes would transform air travel for millions of passengers worldwide. So, I just want to note 2 points here. As I mentioned previously, we're talking about millions of passengers. I mean, think of your experience at a typical airport. How many individuals are there? Everyone is going to be affected by this system. Secondly, the article states that the purpose of introducing this new system is to shift away from a fragmented system. And if you're shifting away from a fragmented system, that logically it means that you're transitioning to a system that is more cohesive and interconnected. And remember that this new cohesive, interconnected system is being built on biometrics, specifically facial recognition. Of course, we're going to see that there are some other elements as well. But let's continue here to this other article from Fast Company. It says, goodbye boarding pass, hello facial recognition. It says UN agencies announce a plan for an overhaul of air travel using digital passports and facial recognition in airports. The International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, a United Nations agency that oversees international airline policy, has revealed plans for a digital travel credential. I just want your audience to pay attention to that, which will do away with boarding passes and current check-in procedures and instead rely on technology like facial recognition. Look at the number of countries that have to abide by this. It says some 193 countries, including the United States, are members of the ICAO. So again, according to this article, it's the United Nations that is the engine that's driving these changes at the airport. And we'll discuss that in a moment. But I also want to note that, again, that they're doing away with these boarding passes, and this new system will require each passenger to obtain a digital travel credential. In other words, they're saying a digital certificate, giving you the permission to be able to fly. Lastly, the article states that there are 193 countries, including the United States, that are members of this ICAO, or this International Civil Aviation Organization, which means that 193 countries are obligated to abide by these new regulations. Just let that sink in for a moment there.
Okay, let me chime in, Marie. So let's connect this to America and the agenda that is now being implemented by President Trump via executive order. By me saying that, I believe you know where I'm going with this. So let's make it plain for the audience. So what we're talking about is a policy to do away with paper. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay, and then implement a digital-only travel document.
Mm-hmm.
And America is a part of it, the U.S.
Yes.
What did Trump just roll out via executive order? Phasing out of paper.
He did.
The phasing out of paper to make the federal government, with its transactions, built on a digital-only platform. Let that sink in. So the U.S. is a part of this movement. Carry on.
Yes, they are. Exactly. And we're going to see that there's multiple layers to this. And of course, they're very stealth in how they're approaching this because of the rights that we have. And they're using, fronts and smoke and mirrors to be able to implement some of these policies. But we're going to see that what you're seeing in other countries is being implemented slowly here in the United States as well. So let's take a look.
If you notice, did they give a date for this, Marie?
They're saying that they're rolling this out over a span, I guess, of 2 years. But again, as we go on in this presentation, we're going to see they're rolling out the Real ID, other elements that are part of the system.
And the reason why that question was posed is to let the audience understand, as we connect the dots, the phasing out of paper transactions in the U.S. federal government takes place this year by September 30. Let that sink in, Marie.
Correct. And not only that, remember that we're also transitioning in the economic system as well. We're talking about the stable coins, and then over there in Europe, they're outright introducing CBDCs. So, everywhere you're seeing different components of the system is being implemented this year, lest you think that just because the end date or the deadline is 2 years from now, that we have to wait until then to see the system in effect. And that's not so, because they're introducing it right now.
Before you move on, let's put two things on the table and come back to them later on. Because when we make this application, I don't want the audience to forget the actual articles that are augmenting these 2 points. Number one, you mentioned the present system is fragmented. So whatever they are rolling out is going to bring a one world system. Let's put that on the table. We'll come back to it. And number two, we just mentioned talking about this CBDC being rolled out, the stable coins being rolled out. Don't forget those 2 points. We will address them later. Marie.
Yes. So let's continue taking a look at these articles here. It says, the days of fumbling around for your boarding pass or frantically checking in for a flight on the way to the airport could soon be over under imminent plans to overhaul the way we travel. So, Pastor, we just talked about that. This whole idea that the plans that they're rolling out, they're imminent plans. And I believe, like I said, this is why there's this drive, this hard push to implement the real IDs. The article continues. It says the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, the UN body, responsible for crafting airline policy, plans to dramatically shake up existing rules for airports and airlines through the introduction of a digital travel credential. I also want to make note of the fact that this is, again, the United Nations that is behind changing the airline industry's policies. And again, we're not talking about a singular airline or an airport. We're talking about the entire aviation industry is going to make these changes. So whether you're flying from the Philippines or from London or here in the US, all of these systems are going to be affected. And in short, we're going to be affected as well.
2 quick things. Notice the term of this rolling out system is called digital travel credential. In the natural sense, can we access various databases without credentials? So without it, we are cut off. Let that sink in for a moment. Secondly, in 2005, they planned to roll out the Real ID. I'm just going there, Marie, because you just made mention of it in passing. And I'm wondering, why has it been stalled? 2005 to 2025 is 20 years. Why has it been stalled? Keep on being pushed back to this year and that year until May 7th, 2025. And now it is being rolled out simultaneously with this UN agenda. Nothing happens by accident. Marie.
Correct. I agree. And like I said, we're seeing all of the other elements coming into play now. And so it's because they're ready. And unfortunately, I think many of us fail to realize that God gave us a respite. And Pastor, it actually dates back to 2001 because they started talking about that in and around the September 11th attack. So we've had, over 20 years to prepare for it. And here we are. And of course, we can liken this also to Bible prophecy. We knew that these things were going to come to pass. And the things that were prophesied, thousands of years ago is now coming to fruition. The article continues. It says the changes would make boarding passes and the need to check in for airports obsolete. I just want to pause there for a moment. Because what they're essentially saying, again, is the way that we normally check into the systems, using these boarding passes are going to become obsolete. And I'm sure all of us at some point in our life, we've dealt with some sort of computing system, that is now obsolete. I remember, not to date myself, but I remember using floppy disks and CD-ROMs and, the indestructible Nokia phones or, the old-fashioned TVs with, aluminum foil, the cable boxes. All of those things have become obsolete. What I'm driving is that once they turn this system obsolete, there's nothing that you can do. You can't circumvent the system. You have to transition over to this new system. And I really believe that, history will show that 2025 was a pivotal point in history, a turning point in history for us. And we're going to see that this was the year that many things took place or are taking place that is going to lead us down this totalitarian pathway. And so I'm hoping that we're seeing what's happening and that we're going to, make the necessary preparations.
Continue.
Yes. So the article continues. It says, instead, flyers will download a journey pass to their phones when they book a flight. Passengers will also be able to upload their passports to their phones and travel through airports using their face for verification. So that's astounding. And when I was listening to this, you won't have to pull anything out. Normally you have your license, your passports, your boarding pass, all of these things. Your biometrics are going to be linked. Well, facial recognition is a biometric measure, but you're simply going to walk into the airport and there's going to be systems in place. Oh, that's Pastor Andrew Henriquez, right? And they're going to know he's going to be flying to Orlando this weekend. And you're not going to be able to, you don't need to pull anything out. And I'm going to touch on this a little bit later, but just imagine this same system someplace else, not just in the airport.
Correct.
That is alarming, what they're introducing. Of course, this may be how they're, fine streaming everything just to make sure there aren't any kinks once they actually roll it out in society.
Right. So 2 quick points there. So from the airports, train stations, Marie, subway stations.
Yes.
Bus stations. I mean, where do we stop? Government buildings. And then just on the streets. Stadiums, Caesar. Stadiums. And concerts. And if you notice, airports oversees almost every demographic of society. Upper class, middle class, lower class. This is boiling the frog scenario. Get the people acclimated to this. So Marie, if I'm walking down the road, they already know who I am, so they won't have to ask me for an ID. Are we hearing this? So what happens to the U.S. Constitution? What happens to warrants? Null and void. Marie, you may continue.
Have mercy, right? And, I'm so glad that you mentioned the stadiums. We didn't include this in this presentation, but they have also rolled out facial recognition. And again, if you think about, all of these other elements, here in New York, they've also rolled out systems in the street. There's things that they can do, I believe, in Florida, where they can identify your driver's license. All they have to do is just figure the algorithm, or I don't know the ins and outs of the tech, but they just change it to facial recognition. This is a system that is in China. This is exactly what it is. Again, it's just being rolled out incrementally. So we're going to take a look at a clip and they're going to discuss that a little bit further. So let's take a listen to that.
Here it is.
New airport rules plan to get rid of boarding passes and check in and go fully digital. The way it works, passengers would download a biometric passport on their phone, drop off their luggage, and go through security after a face scan. Then you'd board the plane without showing your ticket or a passport at all.
It is what people are calling the biggest shakeup in the airline industry in at least 50 years. Airlines and airports doing away over the next 3 years with the check-in process, as well as scanning a boarding pass. That'll all go away. A biometric digital travel credential will be created, or you could use your smartphone. It's going to show your face to a scanner when you enter the airport, and boom, you're in, just like Clay was saying. And this is, this digital travel credential will carry everything. It'll have your passport on it. It'll have your driver's license on it. It'll have your ticket on it. And it'll also understand your flight information to know if you're in the right place at the right time.
Marie, let's roll the second clip and then we can comment.
Well, Clay, good morning to you. I'm wondering, who's in control of all of this data?
Great question.
Who is going to be the one that keeps the safety of all our deeply personal facial recognition data safe that matches to our credentials. All they're telling us, Clay, is that as far as what you and I scan in, that when we go to the airport and we scan our faces, that within 15 seconds, our data is going to be wiped from that reader. But what about on the other end? Who's controlling all of that? You know, I don't know who's been determined to be in control of this data. And if it's a universal thing from the UN, and I don't know if many people know this, but, you know, the UN dictates a lot of what happens when we fly. And they're the ones that are behind why we have the universal language or the global language at airports is English. So they also determine these sorts of things.
Marie.
You know, there's so much to be said in, you know, those two clips, but I hope we're starting to see where we are in Earth's history. Now, he said everything will be on your phone. You know, I didn't mention, well, I mentioned about the facial recognition, but again, it's linked to the data that's in your phone. And so, as I mentioned previously, as soon as you walk into the airport, the facial recognition, as Pastor just said, you know, they'll be able to pull up all of your information. Just imagine what the implications are once, you know, the mark of the beast crisis is in effect. You know, there's so many things that could be said. And again, you know, it's this seamless system. You walk in, you check your bags, you then go through the security checkpoints, and that's it. I mean, who isn't going to want to join this system? Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention too, as we briefly touched on, is the fact that it's not going to be just, you know, at the airports. You know, as you mentioned, Pastor, I thought about the schools, streets, universities, stadiums, even the grocery stores. You know, let's think about that. Even at the airport, they have what's called Amazon One or Amazon Go, I think it is, where you can go right in there. Literally, you don't have to pull out your wallet. You don't have to do anything. There isn't even a cashier there. You walk in, the system is so like it can figure out what you picked up off of the shelf. And then you can literally walk out like it's completely seamless. And what scares me about this system, though, is like, as with anything that's electronic, right? If you're having an issue, who are you going to go to say that, you know, this is incorrect or, you know, there's a mistake? There's nothing. Everything is automated. And again, if the data set, the information that they have is incorrect, you're left holding the bag. There's nothing that you could do about it. I don't know if you want to jump in here, and I'll talk about the second clip in a second.
No, continue.
So with regards to the second clip, he made a very valid point, you know, with regards to who is controlling the system. Like, they have no idea who's controlling the system. Of course, you know, he's talking about the fact that when you arrive to the airport, you know, they do the facial recognition, and after 15 seconds, it's been removed. However, who's receiving that data and what are they looking at? You know, the information that they're comparing and who's controlling that. Of course, we as Bible students, we know that it is the papacy or it's the Vatican through their various agents. But there was something else that he said that I thought was very interesting. He said that the UN is the one that establishes the policies for the airlines, and they were the ones that determined the universal language that's used at the airport. Now, when I think about that, right, I think about the very first time in the Bible that people used a universal language, right? But not just a universal language, it was a universal system. Are we reverting back to this one world system? I'd like to submit to you that we are, because not only will we be using, I mean, English is generally considered the universal language, right? But we're also going to be using this universal system, right? And I just want your audience to note that this was done in Babel, right, which was the precursor for Babylon. And so it just goes to show us the history is repeating itself. And remember what took place when the people wanted to be one, judgment came.
Mercy. I remember three quick points. I remember several years ago, I believe the team members were traveling to a particular city for evangelism. And I believe my wife and I, we were running late at the airport. We got there and the folks in the airport, TSA folks, were trying to direct us to a different line. So I inquired, what is this? And they said it's called Clear. That was when Clear was just being rolled out. You can sign up. You don't need anything paper. It's all facial biometric facial recognition, and you can go through the lines and board. At that point, I said, that's okay. We'll wait in the line. So now it's no longer clear. So now, once upon a time, travelers, Marie, had an option. What you're seeing now, there are no options being given. That's number one. Point number two. If you notice in these clips, as we're going through them, they mentioned how we're living in a time when everything is going to be under surveillance. What would we need to run such a system? It must be a massive AI infrastructure. Now, you know where I'm going with this now.
I do.
No wonder you have Larry Ellison and the others with Trump's blessing about to launch a $500 billion system, AI system, that is going to be the world's largest system. That's number one. Larry Ellison said, when we do this, everything is going to be under surveillance. And if you remember in the clip, Larry Ellison said that the police officer, if he wants to go and use the restroom, he must first, call into headquarters, turn my camera off, I need a bathroom, a restroom break. Larry Ellison said that camera, audio and video are not turned off. There's no privacy. So all those who are saying, it's convenient to do away with the paper, make everything digital, understand that you are losing your privacy. And anyone who is willing to surrender his privacy should not be classified as a human. Do you know there's a saying that says that convenience, the love of convenience, will be the death of liberty. The love of money, the root of all evil, the love of convenience and the love for convenience, the death of liberty. It leads to slavery. Marie.
Startling. I believe that there was, I can't recall who said it, and I don't remember exactly how he quoted it, but when you're willing to sacrifice security for liberty, like you deserve neither. I think it was Benjamin Franklin, if I'm not mistaken. And it, sure enough, people are willing, to give up these freedoms, their rights. I have nothing to hide. That's what everyone says until, I once heard this quote. They said, you don't feel your shackles until you try to move, right? And so once they have you in this digital infrastructure, right? Once you've given up all of your rights and then you realize that the restraints that have been placed upon you, then it finally dawns on you that I should have done something. By then, it's too late. Before
you move on, do you know, Marie, it is intentional for the UN to begin to roll this out at the airport. Here's why. Here's one reason why. If this was being rolled out in America for domestic travel, would there be an option? Of course, I can walk. I'll walk. Option. Or I'll take a cab. Option. I'll rent a car. Option. I don't have to go to the airport to fly from Atlanta to Orlando, Atlanta to New York. I can drive. I can walk. I can ride a bike. Motorcycle. But now when you're talking about for international flights, you can't walk anywhere. You can't drive from here to Jamaica. So it is intentional and strategic to begin there at the airport, international flights. So if you want to get from point A to point B, you have to accept it. There's no way around it. Yes. Marie, continue.
I agree too. And think about it from this perspective as well, because if they were to implement it here just in the United States, we would have our own rules and regulations, right? Or if they did the same thing in London, they would have their own rules and regulations. And it would still be a fragmented system. They're trying to do away with this fragmented system and have one conglomerate. They want to unite all of the systems together because it's a global system. And I think the following articles is going to illustrate that quite well. When we look at Well, he mentioned in the previous clip that the United Nations is behind this whole change. And so if we want to see why the United Nations is doing what they're doing, let's take a look at their documents. So let's take a look at a few of these articles coming from the United Nations. It says, press release, United Nations adopts groundbreaking pact for the future to transform global governance. And see, that's exactly what we're talking about, is that they're trying to change the system so that they can govern from a global perspective. It says, world leaders today adopted a pact for the future that includes a global digital compact and a declaration on future generations. What's the purpose? The transformation of global governance. It says this will affect the international system and international law. It says the president of the General Assembly noted that the pact would lay the foundation for a sustainable, just, and peaceful, here it is, global order for all peoples and nations. Again, this is for the entire world. It isn't, for a singular nation. And so essentially, to put it succinctly, the Pact of the Future is for the purpose of introducing that global order, or is, more commonly referred to as a New World Order. And a part of that system is that global digital compact. And the following article gives us, again, some more detail into what this global digital compact is all about. It says the Global Digital Compact is a unique opportunity to bring together governments, regional organizations, the private sector, and civil society in a global approach to digital governance. Again, this is all about that digitalized system. It says the compact would provide framework to align national, regional, and industry approaches around global priorities. And so I think that's pretty straightforward, telling us what the purpose is. Again, in the following article, we're going to see really the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts of the system. And again, this article is coming from the UN as well. It's called Implementing Digital Public Infrastructure Safely and Inclusively. So by 2028, the 50 and 5 campaign will have helped 50 countries design, launch, and scale components of their digital public infrastructure. The DPI, which refers to a secure and interoperable network of components that include digital payments, ID, and data exchange system, is essential for participation in markets and society in a digital era. And so again, based on the UN's own documents, they are telling you that this system that they hope to establish by the year 2028, that doesn't mean that they're not going to have rolled out the system already. They just want to have everything in place, all systems ready to go by the year 2028. And it's going to be essential for you to be able to participate in society, which makes sense, with all of the things that we've already discussed in this presentation with this transition, that's taking place in the airports. And this is, again, just one component of many in this digitalized system. Without accepting, these new terms, again, they're saying that you won't be able to play an active role in society. The plan, again, is to digitalize all systems. They noted payment, IDs and, data exchange, but you name it. I mean, fill in the blank. Everything is going to become digitalized.
Okay. Put this back on the screen, Preacher, all three of us, with that screen there. I want everyone to watch what's being circulating on the left of the screen. You have data exchange is going to be only digital, IDs only digital, and the payments only digital. Let's just take a look at two things: digital payments and the digital credentials for travel. Now notice, that means if you don't go along with the digital travel credentials, you are going to be restricted from travel. Okay. If you don't go along with CBDCs on one hand, or stable coins on the other hand, you'll be restricted from making any transactions. Do we not see what's happening here? No buy, no sell, no travel. The system, the platform is being laid. Do you know what is sad, Marie? the majority of the people right now are ignorant of what we're talking about. The majority of the people right now are watching TikTok funny videos. The majority of the people are focused on sports and entertainment. Basketball, soccer, tennis, swimming, you name it, golf, you name it. While the mark of the beast system is being laid, we are about to be treated as slaves. Continue, Marie. It's sad.
It is. It's very sad. But you know what? This is why God has called Seventh-day Adventists to be the light. You know, because we know these things, because we understand Bible prophecy, it's your job to share this information with others. And what's great about it is that you can use current events in addition to Bible prophecy to show that the Bible it's living, it's alive, you know, so we should take advantage of that. I also wanted to mention too, you know, it'd be one thing if we were just looking at this and we're conjecturing and saying this is what could potentially happen, but we have living proof that this is where they're headed. I mean, the World Economic Forum, the Vatican, various other entities, I'm sure, have said that China is the model. And so China has had this system in place for years. And you can see how they've been able to manipulate their population based on the exact same system that is now developing. And so we want to take a look at this next chart. You know,
hold on. Just two quick things, Marie, because sometimes statements are made and it goes over some people's head. They don't comprehend what is being stated. You just mentioned several entities that are on public record stating China is a model. And in passing, you said the Vatican. I want the people to go and take a look at that. It clearly says China is the best implementer for the Roman Catholic common good, period. Number two, whatever's happening in China then is coming to the West. And that's why it's not difficult to comprehend why the pandemic, they told us, came from China. And the same policies the Panda Nation used to address it came to the West. Don't forget that. Number three, so when we see even America, the US, attempting to appear as if they are against the policies of China, that is a facade. Because they are implementing the strategies, the political policies of China here in the US. Marie, continue.
Yes, exactly. Let's take a look at this next chart here. And we've seen this before, but I wanted to bring this out, especially in lieu of what we're presenting today, because you're going to see that each and every one of the components that are on this chart, they're actively already transitioning over to a digital system if it isn't already digitalized. So we're talking about traveling, right? That's one of the points that's here on this chart. It talks about travel and mobility. And the fact that all of these systems are linked to the ID. And if you're, like I said, if you're paying attention, you know, to what's happening on the digital front, you can see that they're working on each one of these components. You know, they already have the health passports, humanitarian aid. During the COVID crisis, they talked about distributing, you know, funds to be able to help people through a digital system, but they weren't quite ready for that. Of course, you know, we're talking about smart cities and how everything's going to be linked. We talked about CBDCs and stable coins and all of these things, social media platforms. On one of my YouTube channels, they asked me to provide some sort of identification verification. Like, I've never had to do this. And so all of these systems are starting to do the exact same thing with Twitter or X. You know, Elon Musk has talked about how he wants to transform this system where it's going to be an everything app. Everything is going to be connected, you know, and of course they talk about deep fakes and things like that to prove who you really are. The list goes on and on, how they're starting to attach all of those points that you see on their chart. They're digitalizing them.
Do you know what that means? We are about to see an increase of cameras. An increase of cameras, Marie. Think about that. And do you know what brings chills on my skin? that so-called fictional novel, 19 what?
84.
84. So-called fiction, right? That was written in 1984. Long before 1984, yet the things in that so-called novel and movie are being rolled out today, which speaks volumes that the agenda was already put in place decades ago. Think about that, my friends. And who impressed those people to even conceptualize what we're now doing here today, way back there? It was the devil. So while many are thinking that these things are new, these things have been in their playbook for decades. So why has it taken so long for them to implement these things? Only God knows. And I believe it's 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 9. The Lord is not slack concerning his promises, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to us word, not willing any should perish, but we may all have eternal life. He has been, that's the Lord, has been delaying, holding back the powers of darkness so we could be alerted, awakened, prepared, implement those 5 keys of survival so that we're not caught off guard and be ready for the mark of the beast spiritually, physically, mentally, financially, and socially. That's the love of God. If the devil had his way, everybody, what has been written in books and novels would not have taken so long to be rolled out. That's the love of God for your soul salvation. Yet, again, what are the majority of the people doing right now after 1 p.m. Eastern time? They're playing video games. Grown men playing video games. They're on Instagram watching and viewing illicit photos, wasting time. Some are even drunk right now on liquor, smoking ganja high, not focused on what is happening all around them. People are on fentanyl right now, putting street drugs in their veins. What are the masses now doing? Fast asleep to become slaves to this system. Marie.
Yes, and I think that's a perfect segue for what we're going to be discussing now. And of course, we're going to be looking at the Real ID. And you discussed the fact that there has been this long delay. And as we previously mentioned, they wanted to roll this out back in 2001, but the Lord has delayed it. And again, the question we have to continue asking ourselves is why, has there been this delay? And then all of a sudden, it just seemed like out of the blue, there was this press, to implement the Real ID Act. And so let's take a look at this headline here. It says, Real ID deadline a week away. Do you have yours? And so again, you literally have 1 week to be able to go out and get your Real ID because you have to have it to be able to fly. And also for you to be able to get into a federal building. And remember, initially, this was supposed to be about flying. But of course, we know that's where they start, and then they're going to add other elements to it. But we're going to listen to the DHS security, Kristi Noem, and she's going to tell you that in addition to needing this ID to enter federal buildings and also to fly, you're going to need it because we need to keep the country safe. And so the opposite must be true as well. If you refuse to get it, then you must be somehow, I guess, against the system. And so, again, they're just adding all of these elements into place, and we're going to see that these things are all connected. So let's take a listen to this clip so you can hear for yourself.
Marie, if you don't make this link, we're going to talk afterwards. Let's go. Clip 1.
Hi, I'm Kristi Noem, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. If you plan on traveling, we need your help to prevent delays and to prove your identity. Get a Real ID. Starting May 7th, you will need a Real ID to travel by air or to visit federal buildings in the United States. These IDs keep our country safe because they help prevent fraud and they enhance security. Please do your part to protect our country. Go today and don't delay. To learn more, go to dhs.gov/real-ID. Thank you.
Marie.
Are you waiting for me to make the connection? I'm not sure which connection you're talking about. Of course, what comes to mind is fundamentals on education, right? Where she talks about how Seventh-day Adventists, once we reach the standard, that we're going to become, or be labeled as extremists, straight-laced, and so I think of that, and of course, the reason why they're saying this is for national security. Of course, it goes back to 2001, and all of the terrorist events that took place. But again, as I just mentioned, we're eventually going to get to the place where we're going to be labeled as the extremists. Before you jump in, Pastor, I just want to mention again that this real ID is going to be used to be able to get into federal buildings. And I'm sure they're going to attach other things to it as well. And, some people may say that this real ID right now isn't digital. That answer is kind of yes and no, because it is a step in that direction. Remember that when you go to the airport, you're not using any of the data. Your biometrics, which they're going to use in the airport, is what they're using to be able to give you that travel, whatever they called it, credential to be able to fly. And so right now, it's not a digital card. But remember, they're also introducing these digital wallets, even here in the United States. So all of these things are a step in that direction where everything is going to be digitalized.
And Marie, that's the point. That's the point right there. Look at these two things they're telling us. One, you won't be able to travel unless you go along with this digital journey pass, facial recognition, to fly, correct? But now you can't travel without real ID. So at first, the real ID is a tangible card. So which is it? So right now, if I go to the airport and it's only the journey pass, but I have a real ID, do I have an option? Which is it? It's confusion. So that simply means, then, Marie, the real ID, tangible card in our wallets, will be made null and void. Let that sink in, everybody. The real ID, your ID right now, which is tangible in your wallet, in your purse, is not going to last much longer, because the travel is going to be all digital. So why would they roll out the real ID? Why? It's all deception. It's no different than when I heard the Prime Minister of Jamaica, in the first clip, he said, we are about to digitalize all of our infrastructure. We have our ID, we have our currency. And when the protest came, here was his defense. I didn't say that, he said, because we just printed new currencies. As if we are fools. Now they're rolling out real ID, tangible cards. But they're telling us in the near future, it's going to be all digital, facial recognition, facial biometric. So why did you roll out the real ID? Watch this now. And you were to do it since 2001, real ID. You kept on pushing it back, the deadline, until now, May 7, 2025. So since the end goal is really digital, why would you still roll out the real ID? Simply this. It's the boiling the frog scenario. Just get them from point A to Z, we must take incremental steps. That's exactly what the real ID is. So the real ID, everybody, is not the end goal. It is a means to an end. Don't forget that. And the real ID is not the threat. Is it not the digital ID? Which is nothing but the queen umbrella of the journey pass? Let that sink in. Marie, continue. We cannot allow the people to be deceived. We must be critical thinkers in these last days. Marie.
Correct. And that's exactly my line of thinking. Again, some people may say that you're conjecturing that that's not really the plan. Well, we're going to hear what the president has to say about developing this biometric system. And I also just want your audience to note, if you look at the placard that's right in front of President Trump, this was back during when he was campaigning for his first administration. So as you rightly stated, this plan has been in place for years. It's just now coming to fruition. But I also want to revert back to what you said previously about how President Trump has implemented this new program, the Project Stargate, which they doled out $500 billion for this AI infrastructure. And you have to know that this system is what they're going to be using to be able to handle all of this data. But as you rightly stated previously, that Larry Ellison, which is going to be one of the heads that's going to be operating the system, said years ago that, he predicted that they were going to develop a system that, and I'm going to quote, will someday track your every move, where citizens will be on their best behavior. Like, how did they know that this was going to happen? It's because this plan has been in place. And so, we would be naive also to think that the entire world is going to transition to a digital system and somehow the United States isn't going to be sucked into this. I guess I just don't get it. We have to know that this is where we're going. And like you said, it's just a means to an end introducing this real ID. So let's take a listen to this video of President Trump.
Here it is. And listen to his energy.
Number 8, we will finally complete the biometric entry-exit visa tracking system, which we need desperately. For years, Congress has required biometric entry-exit visa tracking systems, but it has never been completed. The politicians are all talk, no action, never happens, never happens. Hillary Clinton, all talk. Unfortunately, when there is action, it's always the wrong decision. Do you ever notice? In my administration, we will ensure that this system is in place. And I will tell you, it will be on land, it will be on sea, it will be in air. We will have a proper tracking system.
Well, it's there.
He did. He literally just told you that they're introducing a biometric system. And he said it will be by air, by land, and by sea. And what are we talking about? A biometric system by air. It's the same system that, they're talking about. And, again, the concern, some may say, well, what is the concern? Well, I think the following article is going to tell us what the concern is. This is coming from Newsweek. It says, Republican warns Real ID is being used to control Americans. Real ID is a national standard and database of IDs that is primarily a tool for control of Americans. It says Trump shouldn't enforce it. And of course, Pastor, you just asked a little bit ago, you said, what was the purpose? The introduction of this real ID is so that they can standardize all of the IDs, driver's licenses here in America. Because remember, right now, the states are the ones that issue the driver's licenses. And so each state has different standards, right? And so when they establish a real ID, there's one standard and there's one database. And so all of that information is essentially in one pot. And what can they do now? They can give that pot over to the United Nations. This is why, individuals like Ron Paul has been against this idea because, as was stated, it develops a national ID.
Continue.
Yes. And so now...
And let's not miss the point. It's a tracking system.
Mm-hmm.
A tracking system, which means if I want to sell a particular ware, I'm going to create a demand. So I believe this border crisis was actually instigated to bring about the end result. It's nothing but supply and demand. Create the demand for something, you can roll out the supply. Supply and demand. Americans must be brought to their knees by some crises for them to be willing to give up their liberty, freedom, privacy, etc. So that they have to create the atmosphere. create the condition, and just watch the domino effect. Supply and it's an Hegelian dialectic. Someone asks, what if the border crisis was not an accident, but a plan? Wasn't accidental, but intentional. We're seeing it now. I mean, okay. Is there a pattern here? What about September 11, 2001? How would they have gotten Americans to accept the Patriot Act, hook, line, and sinker? And they were willing to destroy buildings in New York City. And they didn't care about the financial ramifications of that. Destroy people's lives. People who died that day, thousands, and those who died thereafter because of black lungs. Black lungs, I believe it was called, because they inhaled the soot and the fumes and all the chemicals. They died afterwards. They were willing to sacrifice property and people's lives just to get their agenda. And you are going to sit in your living room, sit in your cubicle at work, sit in your car driving now, and think that all we have are angels running this country. And the UN, these are vile individuals. They're possessed with demons. And that's why John 8, verse 44 calls Satan a murderer. These men are vile tyrants. Marie, wake up.
Right. And, Pastor, you just mentioned, that somebody said, was this immigration crisis intentional? I believe that it was. This is why as Seventh-day Adventists, we're supposed to stand aloof of the system, right? Because we're not supposed to be voting, for one party or the other, so that we can stand in a position where we can look at things critically, right? And remember, there's two wings of the same bird, right? So as you rightly mentioned, the Democratic Party created this crisis with immigration so that the rights can come in and can solve the crisis and bring in draconian policies. But sometimes when we buy into one or the other, we can't see things critically. And so this is why we have to stand outside of the system so that we can identify it and be able to show others what's taking place. But, here is where we're really going to get to the crux of this presentation. We're about to take a look at several clips. And I think these clips really illustrate, coming from the secular media, they're going to tell you how this new system that is being implemented is really a downward step towards authoritarianism. And I believe is going to ultimately lead us to, the same horrors of the Dark Ages and even to the implementation of the Mark of the Beast crisis. And so I want you to think about those things as we listen to several of these clips. So let's take a listen to the first of three.
Here it is.
The thing which has actually accelerated was, and I'm sorry to mention it, COVID.
Yeah,
do you remember to get anywhere, you had to have 17 different apps on your phone. Yep. You had to have QR codes. You had to say, in Henry's case, oh yeah, I've had me jabs and here's my certificate. I had my test yesterday and here's that. And the whole idea is that your whole world, your whole permission to travel is going to be on your phone. And that's the only way you're going to get around.
Permission to travel. It's all in that last word, isn't it, that Simon used there?
And that's
permission to travel. Marie.
Yes. And that's the point that I want to emphasize, is the fact that once we get into the system, they're the ones that give us the permission to be able to travel. And he also mentioned the fact that the pandemic was what set the stage. Remember, there was an article that came from the UN where they actually said, I couldn't believe it. They actually said that COVID was a dress rehearsal, for future crises and things that, and so you may be thinking from a pandemic perspective, but for those of us that really know, it was a dress rehearsal for other crises that have happened and are going to happen. And now, remember, let's just take a moment to think about, what took place at that time. You weren't allowed to travel, more so, in the European nations, right, without a health certificate, without, getting swabbed and tested and doing all of these things. And according to the clip, that's where we're headed. Now, I want you to imagine, of course, that was a health crisis, which I just want to, put this plug in, there's going to be more health crises. And in case you weren't aware of it, the World Health Organization just finalized the draft for the pandemic treaty. And so I don't want to delve too deeply into that, but you can look it up for yourself. After 2 years, this year, isn't it interesting? All of these things are happening all at the same time. And I believe this month, if I'm not mistaken, they're going to finalize it. And so you mean to tell me that at the same time that they're implementing this digital system, they have finally, all of the nations, of course, the United States is withdrawing. I just want to emphasize that they haven't completely gotten out of it yet. They're withdrawing from the World Health Organization. They finally agreed on this pandemic treaty. So you got to think about that in addition to what was taking place during the pandemic. And so you had to have some sort of certificate, some sort of QR code to be able to leave, right? But not just that. Remember that we've also seen, even here during Midday Power Surge, how other nations and different organizations are also starting to use QR codes for a variety of reasons, right? Do you all remember that during the Olympics, you had to have a QR code to be able to be in the general vicinity of the Olympics? Not just that, and all of the things that I'm mentioning, you can look up on Google for yourself. Venice, Italy, if you put that in, Venice, Italy has introduced a QR code because they're saying there's such a large number of tourists that come to the city that they need to be able to manage the number of people that are coming to visit. So what did they do? They developed a QR code. Not just that, during the pandemic, remember that there was a Quebec island town that also introduced a QR code. Correct. And again, I've heard in Malaysia that they're introducing a QR code, because they have people, that are commuting to Singapore. And so they introduced a QR code. And so you have to know, and I think what it is because when these things are happening, it seems like it's an isolated incident. But when you step back and you look at what they're able to do with these QR codes, you're going to see that it's all going to be connected once they, flick the proverbial switch and turn this new system on.
Let's continue.
Okay, so we're going to take a look at another clip. And again, we're just going to continue seeing just how far reaching this is. So let's take a listen to that clip.
Clip 2.
The thing which has actually accelerated was, and I'm sorry to mention it, COVID.
Yeah.
See, I think here it is.
This is the new world order wrought real, isn't it? This is satisfying for those people who want human beings to be nothing but a data set that can be controlled and can be managed. Because this journey pass will also be the precursor, as we know, to your digital ID and your social credit score. So imagine a world where you walk into the airport and for whatever reason, your social credit score now in the West, not just in China, is no longer giving you permission to get on that aeroplane. There is nothing you can do. It is Minority Report. It is dystopian. It's all of those Orwellian style fiction, works of fiction, movies, books, which have preempted this nightmare vision, and it's round the corner. We're nearly there now.
Mercy.
Yes. So, as she clearly stated, the objective, right, it's a means of control. And again, she stated that they're basing these decisions on a set of, on a data set, right? And so again, this is the introduction to this social credit system that's being developed here in the West, that we've seen in China. And of course, as I just mentioned, once they turn this system on, at a flick of a switch, they can exclude you from society. And right now, of course, it's just air travel, right? But we just discussed, Amazon One, what's that grocery store? I can't remember, but they're linked to Amazon, and they're trialing out.
Whole Foods.
Yes, Whole Foods. Thank you so much. Yes, Whole Foods is partnering with Amazon so that they can create this system. Again, it's all connected, right? And so not just the grocery store, the airport, think about gas stations, going to the doctor's office, everything is going to be connected. And, some may think that this is just alarmism, but this is her words. She's telling you that this is the introduction of this social credit system. And so we're just, applying this to Bible prophecy. The Bible tells us in Revelations 13, verse 17, that that there will be no buying or no selling. And so we're not, like I said, sounding an alarm. We're showing you what they're saying and we're applying it to Bible prophecy. It's clear.
It's interesting. Let's stay with the travel here. The UN leaders are pro policy to combat climate change. Next, they tell us climate change is human induced by carbon emissions. You drive too much with your gasoline vehicles. The jumbo jets in the air, you fly too much, too regular, too frequently. How convenient now. If you have a journey pass, everything is digital. And they connect with that, Marie, a social credit score. And all in the name of combating climate change, we only give you an allotment of so many hours to travel. And for this particular month, you have exceeded that amount. You're not going anywhere. You're not traveling anywhere, domestic or international. And that's how they control the system. It's all about control. But of course, those of you in the back of the class, of course, they will put at the front of their selling points the great benefits. No more inconvenience. No more paper. They always roll out at the beginning of their selling points the good, but they never highlight the dystopian society that they are building. Marie.
It's true. And that's why you have these credit cards coming out with the carbon credits, and all sorts of things. And remember what they were able to do, in some of these European countries, where they're going to adjust your thermostat and all of these things. Again, you have to think about how all of these things are going to
Stop
be.
Stop it right there. Do you remember the IMF deputy director, where he said, based on the system, we can tell how much coffee you drink, where you buy the coffee, etc. And yes. Another guy from Alibaba leader, CEO, stated that they are going to roll out the QR codes and the digital system to track your carbon footprint. And he called it a personal carbon footprint tracker. No travel for you. Marie, continue. You wait.
Okay.
And what are the people doing? They've been distracted. So I'm hoping that they will stop and get back on track with God's business. Marie.
Right. And that's why I said what I said earlier when I said, because these things seem like isolated incidents or events, we're not seeing how they're connected. But hopefully, again, with this presentation today, we're going to see that once they roll this system out, everything's going to be put together. So we're going to listen to the final clip in this series here.
Here it is.
Also bear in mind, this is about if your face doesn't fit. Quite literally, if your face doesn't fit, you won't be allowed to go to that country. And that might just be that you haven't jumped onto the latest social contagion, whether that is about whether a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy, or whether it's about whether you've had a vaccine or you've said the wrong thing that the government didn't like, even whether you've seen that bloody adolescence or not. Whatever the latest trend is that you are meant to follow could easily be flagged up in this new, modern, neo-feudalist communism, which is what this is all tied to.
Mercy. Marie.
So again, she's emphasizing this point that if you aren't following that globalist trend, or agenda or whatever that may be, that you will eventually be cut out of the system. And we know, of course, this is all leading to the enforcement of the National Sunday Law, right? And so you can already see how the system is going to be used to manipulate the population. And again, it just reminds us of how close we are to what has taken place in the past, and how what was predicted thousands of years ago is right before us. And I'm hoping that we'll do what it takes to get prepared, because we see it, we know it, we understand it. It's just a matter of us, getting prepared for it.
Let's take a look at Daniel 2. Because if you notice, for decades, God's faithful preachers have preached Daniel 2. Verse 40 through verse 44, the image of the beast. The stone ends everything. And the stone hits the image on its feet. And the feet is comprised of iron and miry clay. And when the stone hits the image, that brings an end, brings God's kingdom by and by, it states, in the days of these kings, they will be mingling themselves together. Iron and the miry clay. The iron is the papacy. The miry clay, the nations, which include religions. And that they will attempt to unite, but they will not cleave one to another. It doesn't say that they won't mingle, but they won't cleave. They will mingle, but they won't cleave. Different study. And we have been wondering for years and preaching, how is this going to be cemented and become a reality? And Marie, lo and behold, today, we have revealed to Safe to Serve International and the world, this unifying of nations will be done digitally. We just saw it. The unifying of nations for a one world government. Is that not what this is? 100 and how many? 193 countries. By the way, how many countries signed on to the UN Climate Pact? It's the same number.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Same number. This is a one world government being formed digitally. A one world religion being formed digitally. And I'm hoping that we see this. Because in the days, the God of heaven will set up his kingdom. Oh, we see the gleams of the golden morning. Jesus is soon to come. I'll pause it right there, Marie. Maybe you want to chime in here and give us a few scriptures. Any closing words? Because I have a few things to offload upon God's people right now. Marie.
Amen. Just briefly, Pastor, I don't have very much. I wanted to just really speak to the hearts of, the listeners here. I was reading before I say that, we've talked about how they're, taking these incremental steps, right? And how they're chipping away at our rights bit by bit, step by step, right? And of course, we don't want to be fanatical, right? And there's nothing wrong with getting a real ID. There's nothing wrong in and of itself with facial recognition, because sometimes I think people take this to the far extreme. The issue is when it becomes, a matter of conscience. That's where we draw the line here. But along those same lines with this incremental steps that's being taken place, I thought about what Sister White wrote in volume 2 of the testimonies, page 595, paragraph 2, where she had, actually, I want to go past before that. Before that, I want to make mention of another quotation in volume 5 of the testimonies, page 81, where she says, the time is not far distant when the test will come to every soul. The mark of the beast will be urged upon us. Those who have step by step yielded to worldly demands and conformed to worldly customs will not find it a hard matter to yield to the powers that be rather than subject themselves to derision, insult, threatened imprisonment, and death. And so what I wanted to say with that is because you're seeing how this is a step-by-step process, right? And so eventually there's going to come a point where you're not going to be able to travel. You're not going to be able to do some of the other things that you want to be able to do, to participate in. You won't be able to go to the grocery store. You won't be able to take part in some of the things that you enjoy. And they're doing this step by step. Now, I just referred also to volume 2 of the testimonies, page 595. And the reason why I wanted to put those two together was because in chapter 73, she talks about this impressive dream that she had, right? Where they were traveling this narrow pathway. And of course, you know that they began this journey on horseback and with wagons, right? But by the time the end of the journey, they could barely put their foot on solid ground. And so I just want to pull out just one quotation from there. She says, "We then thought of those who had not accustomed themselves to privation and hardships. Where were such now? They were not in the company. At every change, some were left behind, and those only remained who had accustomed themselves to endure hardship." And I thought that was pointed because, again, I think that we have to get to the place where we realize that we are going to lose every earthly support, not heavenly, but every earthly support. And are you getting yourself ready, accustomed to, privation and hardship? And I think that we need to, especially in lieu of what we're seeing, because this is where it's going. Brothers and sisters, I mean, you're going to be criticized by your family for not going along with this system. As I mentioned, not being able to go to the grocery store, flying, all of these things. And so it's time for us to make sure that we stay on that narrow path and that we're not among that number that decides to turn back.
Wonderful. Two quick things. Number one, which is practical. We have to come to a point as a people that not everything that is trending, we want to be a part of it. Not everything that is the in thing, hype, the fad, you want to be a part of it. There's some things that were rolled out and I actually waited until it was a necessity to be a part of it. But a demographic of people that has been pre-programmed to be a part, participate in every new thing, will find themselves become slaves very soon. After all of what we have covered today, Marie, number two, people who are inclined to understand end-time prophecies are going to be inquiring what role the UN has in all of this as it relates to end-time prophecies. And in brief, I want to say this. The UN as a whole would represent, in a secondary sense, the dragon power of the past. Because the three satanic powers, dragon, beast, and false prophet. The false prophet, apostate Protestantism. The beast power, the papacy, and the dragon. And we're told the dragon is that empire, as Pharaoh was called the red dragon in Ezekiel 29, verse 2 and verse 3. The dragon, based on spirit of prophecy, the governor, the kings, the princes, the rulers, dragon power. Watch how this all connects now. In Revelation 13 and verse 2, speaking about the rise of the papacy, it says the dragon gave him three things: power, seat, and great authority. Watch this. I won't address power and the seat right now, but the great authority. When you compare scripture with scripture on the same point, authority, you come to a scripture in Matthew 8 and verse 9. How is authority, great authority, exercised? It says, I tell a man, come, he must come or else. Go, he must go or else. Do this, he must do it or else. What have we been talking about? The UN exercising great authority. That's it right there. And the dragon that gave the papacy power, seat, and great authority, Satan in the primary sense, and also the Roman Empire. Watch this. The Roman Empire was a conglomerate of nations. What is the UN? What is the UN? A conglomerate of nations. That's the UN. And it's now exercising that great authority. And in chapter 13 is the dragon that gives the papacy power, seat, and great authority. So whatever Emperor Justinian had, Roman emperor, dragon power, he gave it to the papacy. Well, America forms an image to the beast, the papacy. So could it be the very system the UN is now establishing will be given to apostate Protestant America? Because America forms an image to that system. I'll pause it there for now. I have one more nail to be riveted in a sure place. Do you have anything else, Marie?
No. Mercy.
No?
Well, I was just thinking about, you talked about that conglomerate of nations, right? Isn't there another passage where these shall give their power and strength unto the beast, right? And so and they're going to fight against the Lamb. So it's the same line, how they're going to work together. And the objective, the purpose is to fight against God through his people.
All right. Secondly, who now runs the UN? Antonio Guterres, staunch, loyal Roman Catholic. When he was voted in, I did a whole lesson on that showing this man is Jesuit trained and Jesuit educated. As we're here speaking about travel, I want us to remember a scripture in Matthew 24. Because when we go to the airport, we go to take a flight. In Matthew 24, verse 15 through verse 20, speaking about the coming Sabbath crisis, mark of the beast crisis, it says, pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, nor on the Sabbath day. Flight. So something surrounding flight, some crisis surrounding flight is connected to a Sabbath crisis. Now, when this was written by Christ, spoken by Christ, written by Matthew, did they have airports? Did they have airplanes? Didn't. So how did they flee? What was the flight to them? By foot, by a horse and buggy, by horses. That's how they moved around, they traveled. But now we have, quote unquote, evolved with technology, airplanes. So is there a crisis surrounding flight that will lead us into a Sabbath crisis? Here it is now. You can't do what? You can't travel without our permission. That's very similar. You cannot buy or sell except you receive the mark of the beast. Do you realize everything God does, the devil has a counterfeit, Marie? Do you know when the angels leave heaven, holy angels?
Do you know when angels
hold. When the angels leave heaven, when they're about to return to heaven, Marie, do you recall what they have to show?
A golden card, correct?
A golden card. So to return to heaven, a card has to be shown. That means crossing borders. Heaven has a system. So what do you think the devil is now doing as a counterfeit? Establishing a passport, travel documents, where we give you the permission. And if it don't go along, no access. Very similar to what we see in heaven. Early Writings, page 37, paragraph 1. You may pause the video and read that. And page 39, paragraph 2, Early Writings. Caller. Any feedback, Marie?
You know, Pastor, I was thinking about what you were saying about flight, you know, especially with what we're talking about here with this infrastructure that is being established. Yes, Jesus told us that we are, you know, pray that our flight be not in the winter and on the Sabbath, but also remember there has to be a flight, right? We have to leave. And once they shut this infrastructure down, there is no flying. Think about that. Even we're talking about air travel, right? Once, if you're planning to go back to Jamaica or to go to another country, once they establish this system, there's no getting out. There's no traveling. So make haste right now. If that's what your plan is, I'm not saying for you to be haphazard in your choice. I'm just saying that, you know, the window, you know, the opportunity for you to be able to flee, it may not be as long as you think it is.
So what we need to do for the Lord now is the time. What must be done for the Lord must be done now. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we're thankful today for the lesson that we covered. May the words be words of substance, words that will awaken, instruct, give practical principles of preparation, encouragement to those who are feeling the burden, feeling anxious. May we all remember that we have nothing to fear for the future, except we forget how God has led in the past. So may we look at our Ebenezers, and may we draw strength, knowing that God blessed and provided, he would do it again. May we also remember our Heavenly Father have 1,000 ways to provide for us, of which we know nothing. And those who accept the one principle of making the service of God supreme will find perplexities vanish and a plain path before our feet. Bless, provide, prepare, save. And may we be a saving influence to those around us, is our prayer. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. 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 Okay, friends, Mary, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
By God's grace, friends, I'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern for Midday Power Surge. God bless. Maranatha.